So, hi everybody, Micheál O'Leary, again, your candidate for Board of Equalisation District 3, coming up on June 5th. Today I'm here with a new friend I met through one of my campaign people, Neil Anderberg, um, Kami Akavan.
Yes.
I get that
You got
correct?
it
Kami.
perfectly. Yes.
And you are the CEO of,
Procon.org.
I knew I'd mess that one up, procon.org. Since I'm in the political arena, I was local mayor of Culver City and council member. I have the bug, and the team has known to reach out to people who are in the political arena, who care, who seem to care as much as I think I do. Tell us a little bit about your organization. I was intrigued when I was told about it.
Sure. Well, Procon.org is a 13-year-old nonprofit public charity that exists for one reason: to provide pro and con research on controversial issues. The idea being that when we want to find out what's happening on issues like the death penalty, minimum wage, medical use of marijuana, it's awfully hard to sift through the mountains of information that are on the internet and make sense of these issues. It's awfully difficult with so much fake news and bias and bad journalism. So we have a staff of professionally trained people who that's what they do all day long is they curate the best research on both sides of these debates and present it in a very simple, straightforward pro and a con column so people can take minutes instead of weeks to understand these very divisive and complicated issues. And what happens is when people read the pros and the cons, they either reinforce their own ideology, or better, they understand other ideologies and they say, well, maybe I don't have it right. Maybe the side across the fence has some really good points I'd never considered. Maybe I should be on the other side of the fence. We found 36% of our audience change their mind on issues based on what they read at Procon. When I found out that stat, that 36% changed their minds with information, you can't do that with a weapon. And here we are doing with information. That's why we exist, honestly, is just to make people's lives easier, to facilitate healthy democracy. We have to be informed citizens, and it's awfully hard to stay informed with this constant news cycle and so much garbage news out there.
Oh God, absolutely. I've as we just went through a local election here in Culver City, and I think I got close to 30 mail pieces from the various candidates, and each one telling me how brilliant each one of the candidates are, depending on what flyer I was reading. And that seems to be the strategy for most campaigns these days, is just if you bombard people enough with the same messaging that the average voter, or as we're calling them, the lazy voter, will just give in and agree with your perspective. So I do appreciate the angle that you're taking, and being in this business or arena for 13 years, longevity is a good measure of success. There's an organization in a caucus in Washington D.C. I just got back, called the Problem Solvers. Are you aware of them?
Barely, but I've heard of them. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, they seem to have a similar strategy. They have a mix of both Republican and Democratic members of Congress, and they look at the big ticket items that their branch is dealing with, and then try and come up with a consensus. And if they get 51% of the group, then they will all agree to go down that road with this. So it's a very clever strategy, and it seems to be working somewhat. They seem to have been getting some credibility, but I don't think enough politicians and the public are doing that. They're not looking for the pro and con. Give us an example of a recent pro con topic that you delved into.
Well, recent is one that we constantly update. It's our most popular topic still, and that is the issue of medical marijuana. California, it's more of a settled debate, right? We know California has accepted this, so have 28 other states. But there's a lot of the country that hasn't yet. And so for this topic, we have broken down pro and con research on whether marijuana is a useful treatment for glaucoma. What about for pain? What about for nausea related to chemotherapy? What about for Tourette's? What about for other mental conditions? On and on and on. And we are interviewing doctors, interviewing medical organizations, interviewing patients, interviewing advocacy groups, and presenting the best of their research side by side. So for instance, we had someone named Felipe who wrote to me and he said, I live in Missouri. My mother has glaucoma and we're thinking of moving from Missouri to California so my mom can use marijuana to help treat her oncoming blindness. And I said, well, Felipe, before you make that decision, why don't you read the pros and cons and see, and of course, talk to your physician. And he said, we can't talk to my doctor. This is Missouri. It's really taboo here. She's too embarrassed to ask the doctor. So we went to the site. He read the pros and cons, and there was probably 15 responses on each side of this debate. And the top medical organizations, top ophthalmologists and physicians. And he called me a couple days later, and he said,
patients.
And patients,
yes,
right.
Yeah.
He called me a couple days later and said, we're not going to move to California. We're going to stay right here in Missouri. We're going to use her existing medication, and we're going to talk to her doctor after all, because this is too important. But I thought, he made a major life decision for his mother based on what he read online. And I thought about, why did he do that? Why did he call us, And I think that our civil politics, our civil discourse has gotten to a place where it's awfully difficult to have conversations about controversial issues with friends and family. Someone will get upset or their feelings will be hurt or someone will get mad. Think of Thanksgiving dinner table where one person will just storm out of the room, cry behind a closed door, and that's family time, right? That's not healthy. And so I understand where someone like Felipe would feel more comfortable communicating with a computer screen and with a stranger than with people close in his life. And ProCon has been that somebody, that person you turn to when you don't really want to have an uncomfortable, unpleasant conversation, but you really want to know both sides of these issues. And how many people have we done that for? Last year we had 25 million readers. We had 27 million readers in the 2016 election year. An awful lot of people want to know both sides, but they just can't get to do that in their daily lives. So I think we have a really important role to fulfill, and one that's honestly not being fulfilled, I don't think, by our media. It's awfully difficult to use media sources to try to figure out what you think about an issue. It's really difficult. It takes a lot of time and a lot of skill.
Well, at least the mainstream media, yeah.
It is. And even if you're using alternative media, you have to balance it out, triangulate maybe 5, 10 sources to figure out, one position. So for instance, we have our second most popular topic is the issue of gun control. If you type gun control into Google, what's the first site that comes up? It's ProCon. And that's true for almost all of our topics because Google likes what we're doing, not because we paid for it. We can't afford those rankings. But when you type that in, it's obviously a hotly contested issue. And where do people stand on it? And there's so much misinformation and so much bias and entrenched thinking on this topic that how do you get people to find common ground on these things? How do we get people to have respectful conversations or even to respect the other side? As a gun owner say, I can understand why these people want gun restrictions, or someone who's pro-gun control can say, I understand why someone might want an AR-15. And we can help build those bridges, but it's done virtually because it's not happening in real life. But by extension, it starts virtually and then it goes into real life.
Yeah, and I was going to bring up gun control specifically because I've touched on it a few times in my dialogues with other guests, specifically with regard to the kids from Parkland, how they stepped up, how they got into the limelight because of some tragedy, and then we saw the backlash and the accusations against them. Have you researched that stuff? The trigger subjects that are causing people to get so polarized in all of this?
Yes, we have on gun control and all of the issues we cover. And really it comes down to this. Issues are not part of our core personality. We didn't come out of the womb and emerge having views on controversial issues. They became part of our identity over the course of our lives. These political identities form at an early age, and they become more and more and more solidified. And at some point, it becomes awfully hard to change it. In fact, when someone is confronted with facts that disagree with what they already think, that person doesn't say, "Oh, you're totally right. I've been wrong for years. I will now adopt the factually correct position." What they'll instead do is say, "I don't believe that. You're wrong. Fake news," and dig further in, even when what they're being confronted with is factually correct. That's called a backfire effect in political psychology terminology. And the backfire effect is very strong. So the idea being the Parkland students were able to do something to get a little bit past this backfire effect because we had another emotion at work, a perhaps stronger emotion at work. We were able to empathize and sympathize with these students, and we could relate to them. There are kids, they're our kids. There's our children who are crying out for help and asking for adults to help them make some change here. And that motivation was so different than our normal political dialogue that it kind of disrupted that narrative that we typically have around these hot button issues. So kudos to them. They actually got us talking and thinking and acting and finding common ground. We held an event at Compton High School, and this was 1 month after the Parkland shooting. And it was where students could tell us what were their thoughts about guns. What did they think about gun violence in their communities? And surprisingly, these students were strongly pro-gun. They believed that guns were an important part of self-protection, that guns should be allowed in the homes. The Second Amendment was a fundamental right. Not everyone, but most of the students. And yet, they also believed we should have universal background checks. They believed there should be no exceptions to having background checks, that we needed to maintain the 10-day minimum waiting period for purchasing firearms in the state of California, and that magazines should be limited to no more than 10 bullets per magazine. And I thought, how interesting, right? That they actually have what would be a reasonable middle ground position, saying I'm pro-gun, but I'm pro-gun control concurrently. And I thought, here the kids are doing it. Why can't we adults do that too?
Yeah, but there's just to beat it a little further, there's a message being propagated by it appears being by the gun lobby, that once the Second Amendment is attacked in any way, that it's the first step in an amendment to take away the Second Amendment. So, what is your take on that? Are you getting in your dialogue or your pro-con? Is that sentiment being shared? Is that sentiment being lived out? Or is that just a threat by the pro-gun lobby to make sure that it doesn't get touched at all?
I think it's a concern by the gun lobby, and I don't believe that they use it in a disingenuous way. I think many people who are firearm owners believe that the government will further restrict their ability to have this constitutionally protected item. And so I think their concern is a legitimate concern. But basically you're asking, are they using this slippery slope argument, saying if you take away this one thing, then you'll take away another and another and another, and soon they won't have the right. The slippery slope argument you'll find across so many issues, across the issue of physician aid in dying, across medical marijuana when it was first introduced, marijuana legalization, on and on and on. So that style of argument is certainly nothing new, but I think the concern is one that needs to be addressed from people in California who may be largely pro-gun control, to address the concerns of people in other parts of the country or even other parts of our state where they say, but is it going to erode my constitutionally protected right? And we just have to have a conversation about what does that mean? Like, you have a constitutional right to a firearm. The Second Amendment does guarantee that is an inviolable right, but it is not an absolute right. You can't go buy a flamethrower, can't buy a machine gun, I can't go drive a tank down the 405. So there's obviously some restrictions, and those restrictions were articulated by one of the court's most conservative justices. Scalia elaborated these many, many restrictions to the Second Amendment. So it's not an absolute right. So then it becomes an issue of degrees. Well, then where do you draw the line, and how, and whether or not it's appropriate to draw it here or 2 layers of gun control later. And that's what it's about. These come down to really policy considerations. But there's so much emotion attached to this because of, we're talking life or death, right? That it's really hard to unentangle them. But I think once people really start to understand arguments from both sides, it's easier to unentangle because you develop a respect for the other side and you understand where they're coming from. And that respect is key to civil discourse. And that respect is really disappearing in our national civil discourse. So your conversation with me, I think, is so timely. On April 18th starts the National Week of Conversation. And what better time to force ourselves into unpleasant conversations?
Well, you're talking to an Irishman, so political conversation is never unpleasant to an Irishman. We actually enjoy it. Sometimes if you throw some fuel on it with a little alcohol, it might go beyond just a dialogue. But we're not going to do that today. But or maybe that's just a reputation that Irish people have. I just think the dialogue gets more intense with a beer or two. But well, there's more than that coming up. There's a big election. Are you going to? Do you touch on election stuff? Do you touch on? There's obviously the governor's election coming up, which of course I'm a little bit down the ballot from the governor and then the lieutenant governor, controller. So is that going to get your attention or get your public's attention?
The short answer is unfortunately no. I wish we could. We are resource limited in that sense. ProCon is really four things. We have an education arm where we're providing curricula and content to schools, including schools in Culver City, 144 schools in Los Angeles County, 10,000 schools across the nation. So education bucket. We also have the issues bucket, which is what we've been talking about, gun control and marijuana and minimum wage and death penalty and whether or not there should be a playoff system in college football. Is golf a sport? We even go there.
Wow.
So it's that bucket. And then we have another bucket about the voting and elections. And so, for instance, in 2008, 2012, and in 2016, we chased after the presidential candidates to get their views on 75 different issues. And if they changed their mind on an issue, no problem. We would show the before and we'd show the after. And if there was another after and another after, we just showed them all. And we made it easy for people to understand where the candidates stood on issues. And then we created a side-by-side chart of all their views. That chart in 2016 was looked at 5 million times. We built a quiz where all the same questions that we asked the candidates, we let the audience come and take that quiz, answer the same questions. And as you're answering the questions, it shows you who you're matching up with. So this really happened. We had people from, this was 2012, we had people from Mitt Romney's campaign come into our office, and we asked them to take that quiz. We hid the results. So as they're taking the quiz, they're thinking, of course I'm going to get Romney.
Line up with Romney.
And boom, when they hit submit, guess who they got? It wasn't Romney. They got the Libertarian candidate, Gary Johnson. And swear, same thing happened with folks from the Obama campaign, came into our office, took the quiz, we hid the results. They didn't match with Obama. They matched with Jill Stein of the Green Party. And I just thought, how cool is that this is an issues-based quiz where we take away the personalities and just judge candidates based on how much we actually agree with their policies. And I thought that was so cool. So I would love for ProCon to do that for all the gubernatorial races and all the congressional races in the country. I penciled it out. It's only $8 million a year. So if you know someone who's got $8 million that wants to invest in this, we would like to do that. Then to go further down ballot to ballot initiatives, to controller positions, to state board of equalization positions, very important positions that it's awfully hard for people to understand where the candidates actually differ, what their views are, and where they stand on these important things. We would love to get involved in that, but it's really just the resource limitation. Right now, we're $1 million operation, and we're fighting against some really, really powerful corporate interests who have got multiple times what we have to offer. But we have 25 million readers, and I think that says a lot.
That's absolutely huge. Yeah, and I can absolutely agree with you how difficult it is, for example, for me with the limited funding to get my message out in a district that's 11 million people. We just signed a deal with one of the Slate Mail companies that is going to send it to 1.2 million of the voters. But that's an inordinate amount of money in the range of $20,000 just to get my message once to 1.2 million people, where my opponent has a huge war chest of last accounting $700,000. So my little one piece will be flooded with others, and therein lies the problem for quality candidates. Number one, to be interested in running for any state position, but number two, having the resources to do it. So it is an amazing dichotomy. So hopefully one day it'll be realized that it's the money that's causing the problems in politics. That if one side is inundated with funding and the other side doesn't, well, it's not going to be easy to see who wins. But I'm hoping this election will take that out of it. We'll take that bias out of this upcoming election. As people who've been following me know, I'm doing a social media heavy strategy, building content, hoping that people will like, share, post, comment, and with that build the resource so that the moment comes, and I'm going to use this term very politely, but I call the average voter the lazy voter, and no, not demeaning people, but people don't have time to be looking up the Board of Equalization or the state controller, what they do and which candidate is better until it's very close to election time. So I'm hoping that content will be just sitting there waiting as a Pandora's box to be opened. Hopefully better than a Pandora's box, but right. With good stuff coming out. Yes. Any strategies for me? Any comments on? You've done. I've done very little research on you, but Neil has. Mm-hmm. Have you researched what's going on in the state elections?
Well, you talked about the influence of money. Money is obviously a huge, possibly the biggest motivator to determine a candidate's success, but that's not always the case. Hillary Clinton outspent Donald Trump by a large factor, and yet look who's president, right? And you'll find time and time again many, many examples of this. So getting the message out is a science and an art. And I think your social media strategy is a smart strategy in a lot of ways for a variety of reasons. Number one is just the digital reach. The dollars can go a lot farther digitally than they can in print. Two is you can have more and more and more and more messaging and alter messaging. So that's really important. But three, and this is to the benefit and the detriment of social media. If someone likes a speech that you gave or a talk that you gave or an event that you participated in, then they are more likely to see more of those things in their social feeds. And so are their friends who like similar things. And that social media has a way of then reinforcing that person's ideologies. So if they like you once, then suddenly it will seem like people in their world also like you. And they'll think, wow, everyone likes Mayhall. I better vote for this guy, right? And so there's something to that strategy. It's creating an echo chamber, which social media is so powerful at doing, and uniquely so, that you can't not have a social media strategy in a campaign. And in your style, which is, hey, why don't I put together some cool content that people actually care about? Kudos to you. High five for that, right? Because this is not garbage content. This is stuff that people actually care about, and it's important.
Well, that part of it, these dialogues, I just love because I'm learning more about the arena I'm jumping into. My mother has never said it to me, at least not to my face, that I'm mad, but other people have. You're mad. People I've asked for endorsement, they go, are you crazy? Mm-hmm. You're running for a position that has had its powers taken away and is really just a stepping stone over in a corner with nothing to do. No, but I think I'm by hearing others talk about the political arena, it motivates me even more. When we see what's going on regionally, this Hatfield-McCoy syndrome, where it's better to be more polarized and just point out the flaws of the other side. And that strategy is working. We have to break that or we will fail. We will fail as a society if that's all that's happening. Two sides are just pointing out the disadvantages or what's wrong with the other side. So I'm feeling that by inviting in more people to just talk to us about what's going on in the arena, I think the message is getting out there. It'll be up to obviously the audience to share it. Realize there's organizations like ProCon that can give you a more balanced perspective. And even though I use the term lazy voter, I believe that voters are doing their homework. I believe that they're doing their share. They're reaching out. They're trying to find out messaging that's not created by the entity themselves. And if you look at it, I was in the restaurant business. I recently sold just to do this, but people didn't trust if I put an ad in the paper, hey, I'm the best Irish pub in town, right. Or if I had a website that said how brilliant I am, they looked up Yelp. Mm-hmm. They wanted to see and hear what other people have said about. So I'm hoping that this snowball effect will happen. Is there any advice you would give a candidate for whatever role in this 2018 election cycle?
Well, I think you brought up a good point, which is you were trying to appeal to people's better nature. And you were trying to say that I want to rise above this political fray, get beyond Hatfields McCoys. Let's break these echo chambers and let's talk about what really matters. And that's the candidate that you represent. But you also brought up, I think, a really great point, which is that people typically identify with the negative of the other candidates. So it is very effective to say that candidate X has this such and such bad traits, and we should all be terrified of those bad traits. So everyone votes so that we don't have more of those bad traits. And as much as we wish that didn't work, it really works. And there's so many political studies that talk about these tactics and how they're super effective. But I'll tell you this, Pew did a research report within the last 2 months that talked about what's the number one stressor in people's lives today. And I thought, money, that's got to be number one. Maybe it's relationships. Maybe that's got to be number one. Those are number 2 and 3. Number one stressor was the future of our country. I thought, that can't be right. And I looked it up and checked it out, and it was true. The future of our country is people's number one concern. So something about appealing to people's better natures and let's get beyond these broken political systems. I think there's something very powerful in that message, too, that we can't ignore. I'll tell you this. We looked at 535 congressional seats. How many of them are competitive? Meaning you don't know if it's always going to be the Republican or always going to be the Democrat that wins it. And when I started looking into this, I assumed that all these seats are competitive, but find out that no, it's very predictable. There's certain geographies that they will always produce candidates that are this or that political flavor. It turned out that there's 5% of all those 535 seats, about 25 seats that are considered at play. They're purple. You don't know which side is going to win. I thought, wow, the magic of democracy is happening in those 5% of the seats. And that was really, really disheartening. And I thought, well, how did we get here and how can we get past it? And how we got here, it's a long story. Basically, gerrymandering has something to do with it. Technology had something to do with it, these echo chambers and how they are reinforcing our filter bubbles. But 2, we did it to ourselves. When you drive around, we moved to Los Angeles and trying to decide where you want to live, drive around Riverside County, you see trucks with gun racks in the car, in the window, and you think, I don't want to move there. You drive to West LA and you see Priuses in the driveway and think, oh, yeah, I want to live there. And so we end up self-congregating, right? And living in communities that really reflect our own political ideologies. So it's all these factors, plus we did it to ourselves.
Yeah, and then, if we turn to our sources for information, they're just reinforcing. And as you stated earlier, when I like something or somebody likes something, the Google, what is the term for when they'll search for similar things? So then they're even sending me stuff that's of similar interest and not showing me something different. And yes, we're going down that path. Hopefully, this generation will have an effect on changing it. We're already seeing that pollsters are getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And that's an exciting statistic for me. If pollsters cannot figure out who's going to win an election, we're winning, because they think they know it all and they think they know which way we're going to vote. And I like the fact that we're no, I'm not going to say cheating them, but we're getting the better of them.
Right. I know what
Yeah.
you mean.
So do you see? Do you, when you look into the future? Do you have children?
I have one 8-year-old boy. Yeah.
Okay, so obviously the future is important to you. You want to know that you're going to leave him a place better than you got it. So, what is your future? I again, if I go back to the Parkland kids, and I've said it many times, I was very excited about how politically active they got immediately. What is your take on the future, the next generation of kids? Do you see the light at the end of the tunnel? That's something other than an oncoming train?
Yeah. Well, both, and it probably varies by day, but right now I'm in optimist mode. And the reason for that is, 13 years ago when I started at ProCon, I knew all the players that were big in, say, civics education, all the people involved in voter engagement, civic engagement, education geared towards critical thinking, and they all knew me. And over the years, there are more and more and more organizations that are now stepping into this arena. They are getting funding from major funders. They're getting funding from states, and they are expanding the effort to bring basically critical thinking into more hearts and minds and in schools. So, for instance, critical thinking is now part of Common Core, adopted by 40 plus states. Critical thinking is now a core piece of the curriculum for the National Council for the Social Studies, National Council for Teachers of English, National Math and Science Initiative. They're all trying to get people to understand issues from multiple perspectives, and they're teaching it to the kids. And they're not growing up as a generation and generations where this is just normal. That's what you do. And I think, oh, that's so good. That's so comforting, because we need that so that they can fix what the generations like ours and others have kind of messed up.
Or are failing them right now.
Right.
Yeah. That's the part that saddens me, but I'm in this to win it, so I know that I'm going to do my piece. Whatever that is, it's curious. I'm running, as I've stated, for a position that has had its powers taken away, but I'll have 100 employees, most of them auditors, and since I won't be able to audit outside of the office, the businesses, etc., as has been done in the past, my strategy is to turn those auditors internally. Let's audit government, see how efficiently we're using the taxpayers' money, and maybe at that moment in time, either the legislature will realize, oh, we need to get rid of him quicker. Or they'll allow me to do what I have done when I was an elected official in Culver City during the Great Recession. We made sure we were efficiently using the taxpayers' money, and then we moved forward if we needed to get more funding, to look for a sales tax ballot measure, whatever we needed after that. But we did it practically first, and I'm hoping to bring that technique, that strategy to state government. So we'll see how it works out. Kami, I'm delighted, firstly, that we met, and hopefully we can share more time in dialogue together. Is there anything you'd like to share one more time about your organization?
Procon.org. It's free. It's like the people's think tank is one way to think about it. And I encourage everyone to just go and try it and use it themselves. And also just to sing your praises a bit, you had such a strong reputation as the mayor of Culver City. And you were known as one of those few people who were not necessarily partisan. They couldn't tell if you were a D or an R. And I think that speaks volumes about your capabilities in walking the walk. He said, no more Hatfields and McCoys. This hyper partisanship is good for no one. And it's just nice to see someone in an elected capacity who walks that walk as well.
Kami, that's quite an endorsement. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it. Don't forget, June 5th, vote for your candidate, Micheál O'Leary, for Board of Equalisation District 3. Let's get this done. Like, share, post. Get out there.